I noticed Celia's chapters are written in first person, while Aggie's chapters are written in third. Can you explain why you chose to do them differently? And did you feel more connected to Celia as a character?
Oh, those are good questions. Okay. Third person was a natural for Aggie because she's alone a lot. And to have her as a 10-year-old in monologue, first-person monologue would have been pretty tedious, I think. I played with that a little bit, and it just really didn't work. It was better to get to know her by observing her and hearing her occasionally talk to creatures. Third person was a natural for her. And just to be consistent, I tried to write Celia in third person, but she wouldn't talk to me. And the chapters seemed contrived. And I thought, this girl's got a lot of attitude. She's spunky. She's rebellious, but she really wouldn't talk to me. And I had heard about this happening with other authors because you lay out your story, and I'll talk about my process in a while, but you lay out your story and you think you know where it's going to go. But when I tried to write her in third person, she wouldn't talk. And as soon as I shifted her to first person, she was just saying, about time. You should have been writing me like this all along. And it really worked a lot better.
So your love for the natural world certainly comes through in the novel. How did you research to make sure you conveyed the area accurately and authentically?
Well, it's what I was raised with. But after I would write it, I would think that I knew a lot of this information, and it is part of me. But for instance, when Burnaby puts the owl on the ant's nest, and those are western thatching ants, I never knew they were called that. We just always called them red ants, and if you had red ants and they were going up your jeans, you were in trouble. And so I checked that. I verified everything, but for most of it, it was just local knowledge. You don't ask a lot about my background, but I was raised on the Olympic Peninsula, and my grandparents brought me up there when I was 4. After they came to California to pick me up from my parents and my siblings, because my dad was an Okie whose family lost their farm, lost their land in the Dust Bowl. They sold their mules, classic Grapes of Wrath stuff, jumped in a jalopy. My dad was a preschooler at the time. Didn't jump in a jalopy, but took a jalopy out Route 66, hit California, lived in those labor camps, worked those labor camps up the coast of California. When they reached the Olympic Peninsula, they settled, they opened a second-hand store there. And my dad was very charming, very good looking, and was really determined to escape this life of poverty. So he zeroed in on my mom, who was the only child of an affluent businessman and quite a rebellious girl. And so they married, and he immediately started the life again of this life of trauma that had been so familiar to him. And he took this privileged girl, my mom, who was pretty entitled and pretty fierce, and started hauling us to all, the series of rentals, rodent infested, no furniture. I was conceived on their wedding night, and then they had babies, just the string of babies. So really duplicating patterns. And so when my grandparents came to get me, my parents were on the point of breaking up. And they took me to this wondrous place. They lived in the country outside of Port Angeles on the Olympic Peninsula, with a lot of old growth firs right on the cliff over the beach, and a lot of wild country out there. And both of them really loved the natural world. And so from the time I was a little girl, I was learning to draw solace from the natural world and getting my first glimpses of Creator God through the natural world. And my grandmother was always making those connections. And my grandfather would walk with me and teach me the trees, always show me the wonders of trees. And my siblings and I, one sister in particular, would climb these 150-foot old firs. You know, the ones that are on the edges of woods are not self-pruned. So you have like a whole ladder that goes all the way up these wonderful trees. And the thing about fir trees, if you've ever been around Douglas fir trees, is you can get really high up in them, and if you fall, you're just going to bounce around on the branches, you know, because it's a ladder going all the way down. You're not going to fall out of the tree and hit the ground. You're going to get all scuffed up and bounce down these branches. So anyway, for me, growing up in the natural world and absorbing that information, and a bird would hit the window, my grandmother would freeze it until I could see it, and we could study the feathers and study the tendons in the legs, and just creating in me this awe about the creation that has so endeared, before I even knew him personally, so endeared God to me. And then, you know, when I met him and realized that these were creations of love, then yeah. So I remember that stuff. That's a long answer to a short question.
So Sugar Birds was your first novel. Now, what made you dive into fiction after writing nonfiction for years? And what do you enjoy most about writing fiction?
Well, I told somebody at dinner tonight that I feel kind of like Sarah having a baby at 95 with this first book. Because I wrote poetry. I've written poetry my whole life. It's probably my first language. And then I wrote creative nonfiction, you know, short form nonfiction, anecdotal essays, long form nonfiction in a couple of books 20-some years ago. But, you know, when you come, depending on where you come from or what you come out of, it can take a while for you to develop eligibility. And I've always really been a can-do person. I believe that I love the study of epigenetics, for instance, because epigenetics mean above genetics. It's not what our genes say about us. It's not what our family histories say about us, or what our, what our generational strongholds consign us to. All of those, our God's a pattern breaker, and and he can restore years that the locust has eaten, and nothing is impossible with him. And so for me to learn fiction would have seemed like the most natural thing in the world, but it just scared the pants off me. I was just terrified of writing fiction. And I don't know if it's because of all the stories I came up with while I was riding the lawnmower or in the shower or, or picking berries or whatever, but it seemed like whenever I sat down to write them, I would just be paralyzed. I didn't write stories. I wrote poetry and I wrote other stuff, and I helped other people with their work. But when my granddaughter was born, when I turned 60, I thought, I really would like to write a story. I would really like to write for her. And I think some of the ways that, one of the best ways to learn history or to learn concepts is really through story. And we're all stories. Our stories are all still being written. And also, you get to this age and you get a little, at least for me, I get a little bit more playful, and I'm just not interested in being so much of a teacher anymore as let's just learn through story. So I wanted to write her this story. So I started just learning everything I could about fiction, and I took a fiction writing class online through a studio in New York, and I turned in the sketch about a girl and a fire. And I was just playing with it. I didn't know what I didn't know. I've got a master's degree in English and with an emphasis in teaching composition, but not fiction. And so I received quite a lot of encouragement from both the instructor and then class members writing me privately saying, hey, we really want to know what happens in this story. So I just kind of kept going. And here's what I was going to tell you about these characters talking to you. What I was astounded with, even though I had the rails laid out, so I knew the arc of the story, I knew where I wanted my two protagonists to go and where I wanted them to land. There's a concept called plotting and another one called pantsing. Are you guys familiar with those? Plotters lay their entire story out, scene by scene, sticky notes on the walls, they know what's going to happen, and then they just write to it. Pantsers just write by the seat of their pants. And I'm a hybrid. I have the rails, I know my arc, I know roughly, key plot points that I want to have happen. But when I start writing, the characters really do direct it. And that's where I guess what I would call what I write upmarket fiction. It's not exactly plot driven and it's not exactly character driven, but they both drive each other. But they drive each other because the characters tell me what they're going to do. And I also taught family psychology, and because of what I came out of, and I had so much work to do, and I did a lot of work in therapy when I was in my 30s. And the resilience of the human spirit and the resilience of the capabilities of the heart to heal really fascinated me. And as I, so as I write these characters, a lot of what I've learned about human nature emerges through that. And I don't know if I just really wandered way off track.
My attention.
But I know what I was going to say. But the characters talk to you. So for instance, I wanted Cabot to do some things in the story, and he took a hard left and did something completely different. And I wanted Celia to respond a certain way, and she didn't. And yet, because their characters were consistent with who they were, then they became more authentic, and that would be my prayer. So, yeah. Did I answer it all?
Yes,
Okay.
you did great.
Okay.
So it's no secret, we know a sequel is coming. And how was it to get to revisit these characters?
Oh, it was great. It was just great. So you guys probably got a clue when you were reading the story that Celia had a little interest in Burnaby. Did you get that? Just a little bit, not developed at all, but and then of course Burnaby is still, so lost in his world, not really even realizing, he doesn't have a lot of self-awareness at that point, although it's coming. But then as they write to one another after she goes home, and you start to see his interest in her. Okay, so the next story picks up with the chance encounter between them 12 years later. And then the first part of the story, the first part of the story talks about how is this even possible? Because you know what Celia's like, and you know what Burnaby's like, and I'm not going to tell you, what has transpired in her life, but she has some history. And Burnaby has gone the academic route, but he's also had to learn to deal with being on the spectrum and how to be a neurodivergent person and to function in a non, with non-neurodivergent society. And so there's that going on, and then this whirlwind romance. And what I'd like to read you a section from it if you'd be interested. This is the first part of the book is 12 years after Sugarbirds ends. This next section is 10 years after that. So Celia is 39. She's working at the University of Idaho as an ornithologist. She's a researcher with hawks, and she's looking for a cross-species vaccine for West Nile virus, and she's not developing the vaccine, but the work that she does with some of these hawks who have recovered from West Nile virus is contributing to that. That's not a big piece in the story, it's just she had to be doing something, right? She had to have a career. So she's working at the University of Idaho, and Burnaby is a veterinary surgeon at Washington State University, and he's quite renowned because he's pretty innovative, but he's still very much on the spectrum. But they've made this very unusual love story work, and the whole book is a love story between these two that will surprise you. I hope and I trust that it will. But here's where, this is chapter 6, and the book originally began with this chapter, and then I realized, no, we need backstory. We need to know how these two got together. So this is chapter 6. It's a Celia chapter. Again, I have there are Burnaby chapters and there are Celia chapters. And it's 10 years later, and this takes place in southeast Washington State, and so the year is 2008. Whoops, just a second. I just touched my Kindle. There we go. Okay, the call arrived seconds before Celia Burke Hayes drove her Jeep between two dunes of Palouse soil. The steep hills on either side would gut her phone's reception. "Hold on, Tara, I'm coming into the draw by that hogback on Kittleson's farm." Celia slid her phone into the console trough and cranked the wheel, bumping through low ground, then up the dirt road's rise until hillsides on both sides of her fell away into a May sea of young wheat. A white pigeon shrugged in its cage on the seat beside her, adjusting its balance with every jolt of the rig. The bird crouched for stability, its red feet wide. Celia braked on the ridge and retrieved the phone. 3 bars now showed in the screen's corner. She shifted the SUV to park. "I'm topside. What's up?" "Say again which hogback you're driving? You cut out." Celia squinted as if to dim the brightness in her colleague's inflection. Tara Soto's 20-something voice pushed on her with eagerness Celia remembered but had lost somewhere in the nearly 11 years between her marriage to Burnaby and her 39th birthday. "Kittleson's just drew blood from RT 27. Celia's eyes roved to the distant peak of Steptoe Butte, protruding like a time-softened pyramid from the surrounding hills, its slopes interrupted by an archipelago of shadows from the pillowy clouds overhead. "Nice hawk, 27. Any trouble trapping him?" He considered his alternatives, still caught him in 3 minutes. Snowflake here looked too delicious. She smiled at the caged pigeon. "Ready for another one? We've located RT5. "You're kidding." Celia's gaze jumped south toward Moscow, Idaho, 35 miles away. She pictured 4th-year PhD candidate Tara working in their University of Idaho lab, poring over tagged red-tail sightings. Poring over tagged red-tail sightings on short and long-range flyways. Tara would be as ecstatic about this raptor's reappearance as Celia was. No wonder West Nile antibody data from this bird had initiated Celia's research and had driven the hunt for corroborating statistics from the 47 red-tails she and Tara now monitored. Her hawks, all previously infected, had survived a mosquito-borne virus that killed thousands of birds and that posed a serious risk to other animals. Though small, her study was providing crucial insights for development of a single-dose, cross-species vaccine. For 4 years, she had tracked and sampled this raptor until his readouts stopped moving and they presumed him dead. Then a UC Davis research team found his detached satellite transmitter on a boulder in the San Jacinto wildlife area, where he must have spent his winter. No one had seen the bird. "You sure it's him?" Celia scrambled for the notepad on the console. "A geocacher called in his tag number and his nest coordinates. It's our boy, all right." "So where is he?" And so she goes on and she sends, Tara sends Celia out to Penawawa, which is on the breaks of the Snake River. And she says, gives her the coordinates and she sends her out to find this hawk. And so Celia doesn't realize where he is yet. And she says, "Know anyone in the vicinity who can catch him?" "You're it, Celia. He made it home. His nest's out near Penawawa, 3 miles from the Snake. 2 routes of access. I contacted both landowners for permission, but only one replied. She said it's a bit of a hike. Got something to write with?" Celia recorded the location, roughly an hour away. "I'm on it, heading there now." "Keep me posted?" "Of course, but..." Celia palpated her belly, the unfinished sentence hanging between them. "I don't know how long I can do this, Tara. I felt the baby move last night." "Your worries talking again, Celia. 20 weeks. 20 weeks doesn't mean we're home free." She leaned her head against the Jeep's window and sighed. You lost the others in your first trimesters. Everything about this pregnancy's been textbook. Has your doc changed her tune? She suspect any problems? No, but I'm still high risk. At my age, forget your age, Celia. You saw the ultrasound. She's healthy. Perfect. After you bring me that runaway bird sample, we'll catch a late lunch. Celebrate your baby girl. Okay, I'm buying. Celia released the brake and eased forward along the familiar network of back roads that led into the Panawawa drainage and the breaks of the Snake River. At a trio of corrugated steel grain bins, she parked and confirmed her GPS route before she extracted her pack from the back seat and bound the pigeon cage under the pack's cover flap. Already warm for May, the temperature was rising. Clouds had all but disappeared. 2 miles of steep, mostly shadeless hiking lay between her, a couple of landmarks the treasure hunter mentioned, and the nest, not far by her usual standards, but to dodge the teeth of the day's heat, she'd have to hurry. She wound her hair into a knot and shouldered her pack, impatient for a diamond-patterned snake 20 feet from her car, and the stack of rattles on its tail, to disappear into rocks so she could set out. A mile uphill, she reached a weathered split-rail corral sandwiched into the ledge on the slope, her first landmark. The enclosure's wire-wrapped rock jacks supported posts the igneous bedrock refused, making possible a simple catch pen for the beef cattle that terraced the hillsides. Damp with sweat, she lowered her pack to the ground, climbed the fence, and filled her baseball cap from the spring-fed trough at the corral's far end. Twice she poured the fresh liquid over her head, her shoulders, her chest, and plunged her face into the clear water. Ignoring the tepid drink clipped to her pack, she bent to the iron pipe jammed into the stone above the trough and sucked its trickling outflow until her thirst was slaked. She traced her fingers across her swelling abdomen, remembering the ultrasound, the strong heartbeat, the normal growth, the doctor's reassurance. Your typical activities are fine for now, the obstetrician had said. Surely this hike qualified. She'd trained on hills like these before she ran the Seattle Half Marathon 6 months earlier, a month before I conceived. She arched backwards, her shirt tightening against her belly as she massaged the small of her back. No worries, little girl. Her little girl, whom she would love, already loved, with all the treasuring Celia had missed from her own mother. She hoisted her pack and sang to her baby, the tune distorted as she climbed the grade. Ahead of her, the sparsely treed ravine led to a tight bowl of the Palouse region's legendary loam, now greening with the tips of sprouting wheat. There, at the exact location sent by the geocacher, a single ponderosa pine grew from a patch of untilled land wrapped in groomed farmland. The size of a pair of dump trucks, the wild island stood a full 5 feet higher than the plowed earth surrounding it, 5 feet above the deep topsoil that had curled away from the native sod with each of 130 years of passing plow. 2 small, weathered headstones poked from the native grasses near the tree, each etched with eroded lettering, and a lamb. Someone's babies, she thought, as a sharp pain radiated across her lumbar region. She dropped her pack at the draw's grassy peak. Just my hips loosening with the hormone flood. She was a mother now, after all. Closeting her fear, she scanned the island's pine until she spotted the redtail's twiggy nest, where the mother hawk's tail jutted from the rim as she tended her nestlings. From the air, the male buteo screed a warning to his mate, then landed on a branch 10 feet below his family. He tipped his head toward the researcher, his white ID tag vivid on one wing. Celia removed the pigeon's cage and pulled her gear from the pack. She sweated profusely now, hot and unnerved. 5 minutes were all she needed, 5 minutes to catch the hawk and extract a blood sample. Then she'd rest, finish her water, and head back down the trail without pushing her pace. A gentle stroll with her baby before she drove back to Pullman. She'd take a rain check on lunch with Tara and check in with the doctor instead. 5 more minutes here wouldn't change the cause or course of whatever her body would do next. A dozen nylon filament loops sprouted from the pigeon's cage like strands on a balding head. Celia adjusted the snares as the bird huddled inside the shoebox-sized enclosure, blinking and irresistible to a hungry male redtail responsible for feeding a nest of eyases and their mother. This wouldn't take long. The hawk remained on his perch as she carried the cage to the edge of the unplowed island, settled it in the wild grass, and returned to crouch near her equipment. Noting her watch's second hand, she whispered, "Go," and started the game, the timing competition into which she entered every raptor she captured. Nothing to do with her research this game, but she usually enjoyed it and had become as obsessive about it as she was about the accuracy of her data. Besides, each bird's dive for prey added another piece of information to her stockpile of raptor minutiae. The quickest hawk she'd caught had pounced on its prey in 9 seconds. Concentrating hard, she tried to let the game and this crucial bird, the one her team had lost track of months ago, deflect her from the fear that had haunted her since she learned she was pregnant. Pregnant again. She forced her eyes to lock on the scene in front of her and engaged long-practiced denial. The pigeon pecked the mesh. The hawk inclined his football-shaped torso toward the ground, raised his wings, and plunged toward the captive bird, talons leading. Simple as that, the raptor landed on the cage. Celia marked the time. 18 seconds. Not quite a record, but close. Gripping the wire cage now, the red tail spread his wings over the pigeon, instinctively mantling the captive bird to hide it from competitors. Smiling at the familiar behavior, Celia kept binoculars on him until the hawk's foot slipped through a waiting noose, which tightened when the bird stepped across the cage. Startled, the raptor flapped, his nape erect, mouth agape, tail flared as he stumbled sideways, caught by the translucent line. A pinching ache spread across Celia's belly as she rose to retrieve him. Tense with pain, she moved stiffly to the cage and spread a lightweight towel over the hawk's head before she righted him, carefully folded his wings, and snipped the noose free. "We'll be done in a flash, gorgeous." Not only for the bird's sake, but for hers. A fresh cramp bit the heels of the first, advancing like a wave through her midsection, curling her toward her core. She stumbled with the hawk to a small towel-draped field table she'd unfolded from her pack. Laying the bird on his back, she snugged a leather hood over his eyes, then extended one wing and swabbed the basilic vein. Sightless, the hawk lay immobile. Her hands shook, so she waited 1 minute, 2, until the pain subsided enough for her to hold the syringe steady, insert the tiny needle, and draw the bird's blood until she could stabilize the vein with pressure, then transfer the sample to waiting tubes. "Look at you, RT5. My anchor bird, caught on the lamb." Through clenched teeth, she confirmed his leg band number with her records. And with a family, no less. She quickly examined him for injury or illness and checked the attachment tag site of the large wing tag. She jotted notes, exhaling gratitude with quick, shallow breaths as she staved off a new spasm, a stronger one. If that hiker hadn't spotted the tag, hadn't reported the nest's satellite coordinates, she'd never have found the red tail here, only an hour from her lab, and even closer to her and Burnaby's home in Pullman. Hunched, she willed her uterus to calm, and momentarily it did. Her hand rested lightly on the supine hawk's chest while the wave of pain withdrew. Then she straightened, lifted the bird to a toweled hand, and removed his hood. "Off you go, mister." The hawk flew before the words left her mouth. But Celia didn't track his trajectory. The next contraction slammed her, dropped her to her knees below the baby's graves. The raptor, the only diversion from her greatest dread, sailed down the draw. On elbows and knees, her face in her open palms on the ground, Celia exhaled as warm liquid oozed between her thighs. That last fierce contraction had obviously conquered her bladder, or amniotic fluid. She rejected the latter thought. At least she'd packed shorts. Only when she stood to retrieve them did she notice the red stain soaking denim and the blood on her hiking boots, its brilliance a stark contrast to a lone cumulus cloud and to the caged white pigeon. She fumbled for the phone in her chest pocket, punched speed dial for Burnaby. No signal. A howl rose in her then as she stumbled past the graves and up through the dirt field striped with rows of young wheatgrass. At the hilltop, she again tried her husband, but the ringing phone dropped from her hands when pressure and an oceanic pain forced her to shove her new maternity jeans to her ankles and squat. In the next contraction siege, she pushed a tiny, squirming baby girl into her waiting hands. That's the end of that chapter.
Well, you had me hooked the entire
Same.
time.
Oh, good.
You have a wonderful read aloud voice. I would like you to follow me around and please read everything out loud for me because. But just as a reminder for everybody, when does the sequel?
It comes out May 7th.
Okay, everyone put it on your calendar.
Yeah.
Talk to your local public library about getting your name on the list.
Yeah,
for the
request it
sequel.
from your library if you would. It's just, it's available for pre-order now, and I don't like to hawk. Yes, I do. I want you to get it.
And we want to read it, so that's why I asked.
All right, Cheryl, I'm curious. What do you like to read?
I love rural fiction. I like historical fiction. Largely because of the nature component in it, and I like people's interaction with land and creation as character. Lately, I've been reading some books by Jeffrey Lent. Have any of you guys read his stuff? Amazing writer. Amazing writer. He's got a book. I mean, it's hard stuff. Some of it's hard, but it's spectacular literature. And his book In the Fall is an epic antebellum piece, and it's really good. He was raised in Vermont, in rural Vermont, and so he has a lot of the details, say, that Wallace Stegner's stuff has. Have any of you read Wallace Stegner? Love Wallace Stegner too. His book A Slant of Light has a character that leaves for the war and then comes back to his homestead. They're just really well done. But when I read these stories, it's my goal and my prayer to write literature that captures the evocative sense of interaction with the land and of nature in contemporary fiction. Because our culture today, by and large, I mean, you guys are somewhat more of an exception because you live in this rural agrarian society, but are really disconnected from the land, disconnected from the created world. And to be able to watch people in contemporary time periods interact in their lives, but also with the land, weather, animals. I love that. So.
Well, many of us have read the book, but some have also listened to the audio. Did you get to have any input into your voice talent on the audiobook?
Yeah, it was a really neat story. I didn't, I don't have any say on Leaning on Air. I don't know who they're going to pick for that, but I was going to try to record Sugarbirds myself, so I found a studio about a half hour from my house, and the fellow out there, it's just a studio out of his house, but he had done some big books for places like Random House and HarperCollins and some big publishers. So he knows the industry, and he's been doing it for 30 years. And he goes, "How did you find me?" And I just found him on Yelp. I didn't even know what I was looking for, but I went out there and I tried to record it, but my voice has a little wiggle in it now, and I just couldn't do all the voices. And so when we'd listen to it back, I tried for 2 days, a few hours at a time, and then I'd just go home and fall into bed exhausted because it's really intense. But then when I would hear it back, I'd say, Bob is just not, it's just, and he goes, well, it's okay. And I go, no, it's not okay, it's not. And he goes, well, I have a reader. And I'm thinking, well, he's got a college kid or he's got somebody that he knows. He goes, no, really, I have a reader that you might like. And so he says, here, I'll play. She was just out here recording, so I'll play for you. And so he put this recording on, and I go, oh, I know that voice. And it's Jane Entwistle. Have you heard any of her stuff? She's won Earphones and Odyssey, Odyssey Awards and Earphones Awards. And she usually works out of Los Angeles, but she was escaping COVID and came to Bellingham, and she was working out of this guy's studio. And he says, see if if she likes the book and she agrees to read it, just see. So I sent her the book, and she liked the book, and so she read it. Yeah.
I love that.
I know. And she's British, so if you listen to the audiobook, you cannot tell, except she uses, she calls mastitis, a teat infection in cattle, she called it mastitis. But that's the only place I could see. Yeah.
Wonderful.
Thank you. You have answered all of our current questions. I just had to take a moment and share. Can you hold my mic quick? Yeah. We do have a special tonight. We have Sugar Birds for sale for $15, or you have the package deal of also The View from Goose Ridge, 2 books for $20. So if you would like to take advantage of that, that is tonight. Make sure and stop in and grab that.
The View from Goose Ridge is a collection of half of it's a collection of pieces that I wrote for Women of Faith when they were in their conference days. Do you remember the Women of Faith conferences? So Karen Linneman and I each had weekly columns on for Women of Faith. And then the second half of the book was written exclusively for this book. But if you want to just hear more about my life, they're anecdotal nature devotions that are about my life and family. So you might like that. So hopefully it blesses you.
Well, we
do have some time to turn it over to the audience. If any of you have a question, we will run you a microphone.
I'm standing up. Somebody has
She's
to
ready.
have a
She's
question.
ready for it.
Yeah. All right, here we go.
The name Burnaby, especially the one time, and I only recall it once, when he says, I prefer to, made me think of Barnaby the Scrivener's repeated, I prefer not to. Were you thinking of that classic work at all?
Nothing new under the sun, is there?
So then, if not a reference to Barnaby, what does the name Burnaby come from?
I like to say it. And we have a little town across the line, just crossing. We live a mile from the Canadian border, and there's a town called Burnaby up there. But also, my husband is a dairy veterinarian, or he was. He's retired a couple of years now. But one of the farms he went to had a worker there named Burnaby, and he would come home with Burnaby stories. Nothing at all like my Burnaby, but I just always thought that was a fun name to say, and it was memorable, and so. Nothing too exciting. Yeah.
Anyone else? Here I come.
Could you give a brief overview of your life after you came to Washington, to the Olympic Peninsula with your grandparents? Then you apparently went to high school, college, and apparently taught. Mm-hmm. Could you give us some of that?
Yeah. Okay, so I came with my grandparents and lived with them for about a year. And then my mom returned with my 3 younger siblings, and my granddad put her to work. She's a challenging woman, and I want to honor her. She's given me permission to say what I say about her. But she ended up working for my grandfather, and because he was raised the child of hardscrabble pioneers to the extent that his family lived in a barn for a while when they came down from Alaska, where they had been a pioneer family up there. He hadn't wanted his only daughter ever to suffer any discomfort. And so she was tremendously coddled, and then as he grew more affluent, she really was a very privileged child. So that made her, but she was lonely. And so when she started having these babies, she as much as said that she wanted the babies to fill her. And so you have this big role reversal thing. So we had residential stability in Port Angeles for the first time. We had this love and blessing from grandparents who were precious to us, really, who saved our lives. They really saved our lives. And then but we still had this very angry mother. And so we're all running, we're all this little pack of sugar birds, my siblings and I, and raised somewhat feral. My mom was overwhelmed. She had this wild little pack, and she's working and she's trying to make a go of it, and she's never had to do anything in her life. She's never had to do anything. And I can remember when my brother and I, one Sunday, were out tearing around, and there was a little church at the end of our street. And, I can't tell my story without all these points of intersect of God just protecting me and looking after me, or showing me, giving me introductions to Him. But so my brother and I go in. It was cold out. It was November, December. It was very gray, very cold, and I just remember we'd been out tearing around. But there were all these cars parked at this little church, and so we went inside this little church, and all these people were walking up front for these crackers. And so my brother and I just got in line, and we went up there, and we each picked up one great big cracker and just started eating it. But we had no idea what communion was. But this fellowship of these people in this church just loved up this little pack of kids, and then we were on our way with our crackers. So it's like there were times like that. So we grew up on 5th Street until I was a sophomore in high school. I can remember, it was a long walk to school, and I was young. I started school early, and I was a 16-year-old senior in high school, so I was a lot younger than all these kids, and everybody else is in adolescence, and I'm not, and it was as though, and this has something to do with the whole writing thing too, but I think a lot of kids who come out of trauma believe that their trauma is for them something like eye color. Like it's part of them and part of their identity. And for me, they had identified me as a precocious child, and so I thought that I was supposed to be smart, but my house was chaos, and I had, it's like this PTSD thing, I couldn't concentrate. I was smart enough to where, like, I graduated with honors, but it's like I didn't excel in school because it's like I was always on the run, and I felt fraudulent. So I don't know if anybody can identify with that, where people believe you're one thing, but you believe you're fraudulent. In the third book that I just wrote, this girl is a fisheries biologist who has gotten a mixed message from her mother, and she believes that she can't remember anything, and so she pursues academics as a way of dealing with this fraudulent thing. So it's kind of fun the way you put enough time between your story and your life, and God does enough redemption and resurrection in your life that then that story can hopefully be meaningful for others. And I know I'm taking a rabbit trail here, but going to school and thinking that you were supposed to be performing at a certain level of expectation, but really just barely being able to survive. And like my sister, who I think is way smarter than I am, was a shaken baby, and she's had the same thing. And she was in her 50s before she realized that, that mother had shaken her. And And so when you're going through that, it's not like you can make your identity happen on your own. The Lord brings people into your lives. He brings himself into your life. And there's just this beautiful shift that happens over the course of a lifetime. And that's why I say we're all stories, we're all books. And so that was a little aside there. But so then when I went to high school, graduated, I just turned 17 when I graduated. I was the first in my immediate family to go to college, although peripheral lines that weren't involved in that kind of chaos had college educations. But I went to school 2 hours away. For me, that might as well have been to the moon. I only chose that school because I went to a Pacific Lutheran. But I chose that school because there were kids at my college that went there. And it had brick buildings. That was my reason, you know. But it got me out of there. And then I met Christ as a 19-year-old. A friend invited me to a Bring a Friend Bible study. And then I can remember looking at the Word of God. My grandparents had given me a Bible when I was 4, but, you know, it's just, the words mean nothing. You don't understand them. You can't understand them. But I can remember opening that Bible after I met the living Christ and reading the Word, and the scales fall. It was the most breathtaking experience of my life to be able to read that Word of God and to understand it. You know, and so that's, I guess those would be the pivotal things in my life. I sought accolades for affirmation. I was kind of cute back then, so I worked that a bit. And then when I began developing my new identity in Christ, then everything changed. I met my husband when I met him sophomore year. He asked me out once sophomore year, and I turned him down. And after my junior year, and at this time I'm still just, what was I? Was I 19? I think I was 19. I went out with him for about 6 weeks, but he was so different from the sort of guys that I typically was attracted to that, and I'd been kind of seeing this other guy, and so I broke off with him after about 6 weeks. But he took me on the most interesting dates and the most fascinating things, you know, that he would talk about. But I think he just terrified me, and we still talk about this, and he makes up all kinds of stories about, what was I really thinking. But the next year, his roommate asked me to make a sign for him. I'd been a college cheerleader, and so in those days they made big banner signs, you know. So on the pretense of getting me to come to this party, he says, we need you to come, we need you to make him a big sign because Blake just got into vet school. So I made him a congratulatory sign, and he came in that night, and it was a surprise party, and he and I ended up talking until 3 in the morning. And I just remember thinking, I almost let this guy get away. What was I thinking? And the first time that I knew I was in love with him was when we were running, and we were talking while we were running, and he was telling me that when he was a boy, he tried to make a robin's nest. And he said, and when I tell this story, he goes, no, I didn't try to make it, I made a robin's nest. And so he crafted it with the grass and with the mud, and his fascination with birds and with animals and with the natural world was a beautiful touch point for us. And then after that, then he sketched the parent bird, and of course that found its way into sugar birds. But yeah, it's been a love story ever since. Although, you know, he when he reads some of these, he goes, well, you're writing about me, aren't you? I go, well, there are pieces of you in here. but all of my characters are composites. And I'm way too chatty here, sorry.
Is there anyone else with a question?
If we have time, do you want to hear how Burnaby responded to her? in the field? Or was that? If I can, you know what? I don't know if I've got it here. Hold on. Is our time okay? Are we okay for time?
We're good, yeah.
I just would like you to see hear Burnaby as an adult. Hold on, I gotta just.
Cheryl, if it's easier, you can sure stand behind this podium and put the mic back in here so you're not shuffling.
That would be good. That'd be good. So, okay. Okay, hold on one sec here. Okay, so Celia has just delivered this baby. And this is chapter 7, Burnaby. Glound and gloved, Burnaby watched the sorrel gelding sway. As the sedating injection took effect, 4 WSU veterinary interns leaned the horse into the cushioned wall until the animal folded to the floor and settled onto his side. A second-year resident inserted an endotracheal tube, then gripped the halter's cheek straps like handles, supporting the animal's head as cables drew his hobbled feet toward the ceiling. Suspended like a cinched drawstring bag, the 1,000-pound thoroughbred rolled into the WSU Veterinary Hospital's equine surgery room, guided by fourth-year vet students. And the hoist that tracked an I-beam overhead. The team lowered the horse left side down onto the padded surgical table, positioning the animal's right legs in elevated stirrups that would relieve muscles when the horse's bulk compressed them. An anesthesiologist hovered, connecting tubes and wires. Techs swabbed and prepped the shaved backbone, positioned surgical instruments and electronic readouts. A handful of students gathered to watch Burnaby's kissing spine surgery on the horse's thoracic vertebrae kept their distance. He liked it that way, grateful that both his reputation as a brilliant surgeon and his atypical, aloof mannerisms kept them on tenterhooks. Here in the teaching hospital, absorbed in his work, he had no time to modify his eccentric tics or the availability of his eyes. His odd students gave him wide berth. Resident Mac Winthrop approached Burnaby from the scrub room with latex-clad hands upheld. Confirming, Doc, dorsal spinous process subtotal ostectomy. No changes since our review, correct? I'll open for you at T10. Burnaby nodded at his assisting surgeon, distracted. His phone was buzzing again in its 4th series of silenced rings since he'd begun his surgical prep. 4 incoming calls on a bacteria-laden phone immediately before surgery. He'd ignored the first 3 and expected no more, given the statistical infrequency of calls to his cell. Hadn't he extinguished regular voice calls? By never answering? Friends, colleagues, the emergency dispatcher, even his wife, they all knew to text, knew he'd reply on his schedule, not at others' arbitrary prompts. The buzzing quit, then began again within seconds. Burnaby grimaced, jerked an elbow toward his hip in a spasm that caught Mac's eye. You okay, Doc? Neglected to remove my phone. Back pocket, the buzzings. Got it. Mac waved a gloved hand. Sarah? A coverall-clad student left her post at the closed-circuit camera and hurried toward them. Mac cocked his head toward Burnaby. Dr. Hayes's phone. Pull it from his pocket, please. Shoulders bent, Sarah reached under Burnaby's surgical gown and pulled. Who's calling? Burnaby hoped his monotone eclipsed his annoyance. The horse's cardiac waves blipped on the suspended screen, and he dipped his chin with every beat. The surgical team stood ready. Nobody now, Dr. Hayes. She flashed the screen toward him, then looked again as another call arrived. It's Celia, she said. Celia, his wife, his other sphere, calling him here? She registered dimly. Here in the operating room, her face and body were distant concepts, her mind an idea. Here, surgery stripped him of her, reduced him from man to electron, generating a charged field of healing bones, where his fingers and brain participated in regeneration that came from beyond himself. He clenched and unclenched his hands. His cheek twitched. Mac, his brow furrowed, studied his mentor's profile. "Answer it, Sarah." Her thumb ticked the screen. Before the phone reached his ear, the pull of his wife's heart-rending cry found its way to Burnaby 3 feet away and spun him into that other orbit, where Celia was his nucleus. "Oh, oh, 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 Burnaby, Burnaby, our baby." He lunged toward Sarah, seized the germy phone as Celia's words disintegrated into gut-wrenching sobs. "Go, Hayes, I've got this." Mac gestured toward the door. All eyes in the silent surgery clung to Burnaby as he ran from the room, his course tilting as he assembled the fragmented data pouring from his phone. "Come get us, Bern, hurry, she's still alive. She's trying so hard." "Where are you?" His thoughts whirled. He tore away his surgical mask and cap. Phone between his ear and shoulder, he stripped off his gloves. "Climbed to the pine to test the hawk." "What pine, Celia? Where?" On speakerphone now, Celia's voice came from far away, high and small and loving as she sang to their baby. "She's struggling, Bern. I'm bleeding." "Where, Celia?" He summoned solutions. "Does Tara know?" "Yes, Tara, yes, she sent me here." Her voice wobbled through hiccups. "Keep the phone near you, Celia. I'm hanging up to call Tara. I'll return shortly." She was singing again as he disconnected. Tara picked up immediately, and then he gives the specs.
We just want to thank you again for coming out. I think that concludes the question portion of the evening. I think there was a conclusion that we were going to do.
Thank you
Thank
for
you.
joining us. Oh, you can stay, I believe. I think we're gonna.
Thank you. That was beautiful. My name is Jenny Breams. I'm the Director of Library Services at Dordt University, and we've been doing One Book, One Sioux County since 2016, and I am so pleased to be part of this community of readers here in Sioux County, and for the authors who have graced us with their presence and led us into all sorts of conversations. And one of my favorite things, a tradition that we've started, is that